As of the published date of this episode, I am an associate of Ulta Beauty. The ideas and thoughts represented here are my own and not that of my employer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast. This podcast provides actionable insights for early stage brands that are looking to grow their brands from 0 to 20 million. For today's episode, I'm joined by Amy Jargo, and we talk all things natural retailers as it relates to beauty brands. Here's a snippet from our conversation.
And then the last thing that is important to be aware of is just how expensive the natural channel is. All retail is expensive, but I found that brands were often surprised by the costs associated with entering the natural channel. So the main policies that differ from conventional retail to natural retail is distribution and what is called free fill. So essentially that is because many natural retailers don't own their own supply chain in the beauty category. They will require a brand to do business with a third-party distributor. What I would call a slotting fee is often called free fill in the natural industry, and that essentially requires a brand to provide free goods as the first shipment, or a percentage of that first PO is free goods or has a discount, for example.
This was such a good episode. Let me tell you a little bit more about Amy. Amy started her career in retail at Target. She spent her time there working in beauty and personal care departments and really cultivated a passion for working with emerging brands there. She then left Target to buy beauty at Whole Foods Market. After she was at Whole Foods Market for a number of years, Amy joined Pacha Soap. And that's where she currently works, and she leads new product development at Pacha. I'm so excited for you all to hear Amy's insights as someone who has been both on the retailer side at a mass retailer and at a natural food retailer to talk about how that relates to being an emerging beauty brand. I'm also really excited for you all to hear Amy's perspective as someone who also works for a brand now. Let's go ahead and get into the episode after a word from our sponsor. Enjoy! I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor for the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast, the Emerson Group. Through their support, we're able to continue to talk to industry experts to provide early stage brands with strategies and tactical insights on what they can do to help their business grow better. Thank you again to the Emerson Group for their continued support. And let's go ahead and continue with the show. You have this great lens where you've been on the brand side and on the retailer side. So I'm excited for the context that you'll provide for our audience today. And I would love to just start off with a compare and contrast. You bought beauty at Target. You bought beauty products at Whole Foods. What are some key differences that would help emerging brands as they think about approaching retail and think about a mass channel versus this natural channel, which I call a version of specialty channel?
So first, let's start with what's similar at really all retailers. In beauty, everyone's looking to differentiate. They want brands that are going to help them give their consumer a reason to shop beauty with them versus another retailer. And then when you look at retail, no matter what the retailer is, the science of retail is really the same. So each buyer is going to be using the same general fundamentals of category buying to make decisions. So your pitch should use the same methodology, no matter the retailer, but don't use the same pitch, just the same methodology. Know the consumer, know the customer, know the retailer and their strategy, and then understand how your brand can fit those needs using as much data as possible in your approach. So that is what is similar. In terms of what differs, there are a lot of differences between the natural channel, like a Whole Foods Market, and the mass channel, like a Target. So at a natural grocer or at Whole Foods Market, the consumer is already shopping in natural grocery. So number one, they value wellness. So that might mean that they're even more engaged in your story and your ingredients and the way that you make your product and why. Additionally, at Natural, team member engagement is really, really high. So team members here can be your number one fan and brand advocate. And there may be opportunities for you to leverage that to provide education or sample products for them to try, for example. These two channels are also going to look very different in terms of what costs look like. So as you know, Monique, retail is costly. Your listeners know retail is costly. where you're spending your money might look a little bit different. The big differences in distribution. So Target owns their own distribution centers. Whole Foods Market works with third-party distributors and requires that brands do the same. UNFI is their largest distributor. And then in my experience, I think that the natural channel requires more of a financial investment on the front end. So when you actually enter the retailer, and then Target has more liability or costs maybe on the back end if you were to exit. So that's another difference.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think some of the differences that you mentioned in cost are super critical because if you are an emerging brand, the biggest challenge that you have is figuring out how to be profitable. And so understanding some of these key differences in finances is really important because it's going to be that much more critical to your success. So that's where if brands are considering what channel should I go after, having this understanding of, there's additional costs if I'm working with this third-party distributor are going to make a big difference in terms of, do they have the cash to go to a natural foods retailer, or do they need to ask for more funds so that they can approach that kind of retailer and know that they're going to still be profitable and still manage or promote their brand in that way?
Absolutely. Nobody likes surprises. So I think that you're going to have limited success trying to change the costs. But the first way to approach it is to understand the costs, because that's your first way to create the right strategy to be successful. Understand them and they're not as scary, or you at least know how to prepare.
Love that. So I'd love to hear from you. What were some of the key learnings that you had when you were in the naturals channel that could help independent brands? And this could be specifics on, this is what you need to be differentiated, shop my shelf. They might be things that, to your point, there's some things that are similar across retailers in terms of shop the competition, understand our terminology, right? But I'd love to hear from you what some of those things that you learned were when you were in that naturals channel.
In the natural channel, I first learned a lot more about what goes into a product and learned a lot more about the clean beauty industry. So since Whole Foods Market is a natural grocer, I learned about product quality, transparency. Every single item on their shelf is evaluated to pass their quality standards. So the ingredients on the label, the product claims, the packaging, and everything that goes on it. So as a buyer, I learned a lot more about what goes into a product and then how to make sure that those claims are represented transparently to the consumer. I did a lot more evaluating from that lens than I did as a merchant at a mass retailer. So clean beauty was the first learning. I also learned a lot about the value of the in-store team members. So team member education can do a lot to make launches successful. And I learned that. I would bring in brands and I saw some succeed and some fail, and really learned the value of taking the time to guide the brand in educating the team. That can really make or break a brand at shelf if it's done well. So team members in the natural channel are very engaged in the products they sell. They're interested in what is in the product, what it does, who made it. And so they really can be a brand's number one fan and brand advocate. And then the last thing that is important to be aware of is just how expensive the natural channel is. All retail is expensive, but I found that brands were often surprised by the costs associated with entering the natural channel. So the main policies that differ from conventional retail to natural retail is distribution and what is called free fill. So I talked a little bit about distribution already, but essentially that is because many natural retailers don't own their own supply chain in the beauty category. They will require a brand to do business with a third-party distributor. What I would call a slotting fee is often called free fill in the natural industry, and that essentially requires a brand to provide free goods as the first shipment, or a percentage of that first PO is free goods or has a discount, for example. So that will take the place of a traditional slotting fee. A different retailer might just charge you a fee to get on their shelf. This is how the natural channel approaches it. But on the flip side, there's not that expectation to support the exit fees. So that's when I say that it's a little bit more expensive to get into natural. It's also then, on the flip side, less expensive to exit natural too, which is important to consider. Otherwise, the costs look the same as other channels. So promotions, marketing, a lot of that is pay to play, and that will be a similar structure.
Okay, that's really helpful. And that free fill, that is news to me. So very helpful information. Helpful information, though, again, as brands are thinking of building that P&L and just build that into the cost of doing business, right? Like it's kind of like pay to play. I'd love to stay here and talk a little bit more about naturals, because as we think about retailers, I want this podcast to really educate the audience on how retail does business. Some retailers will take a single item that is a hero SKU. Other retailers like to build out full brand stories. Other retailers might say, you know, if I think of some specialty beauty retailers, they might provide a full end cap or full shelf when brands are launching. So I'd love to talk a little bit about launching in naturals. What should brands expect in terms of space? Is this a place where you can launch a single SKU? Are buyers looking for a full brand story, lots of engagement on social media? I would love to just hear some initial thoughts that you have around that.
So you can absolutely launch one SKU in the natural channel. As a product developer, I love products. So I would say, and in beauty, as you know, we love our products. So don't launch one SKU. Find a way to be productive across multiple SKUs in the same product category and give that customer more to love. But if it's the right SKU, absolutely, you can launch one SKU. In natural, the space is very constrained. So natural grocery is a grocery store. So they don't have the space to devote to the beauty category that a Target or a Walmart might have. The stores in general might also be a little bit smaller. So categories that at a Target, for example, might have 24 feet of space, have perhaps 8 feet of space at a Whole Foods. Now, the assortment is limited more to products that are defined as natural or clean, so that narrows the space a bit. But no matter where you look, space is competitive. So there isn't an ample amount of space to create a strong brand presence across multiple SKUs. The productivity of that SKUs is going to be really, really important. So you'll want to think about where your brand should live in the store. Sometimes in these stores, as with many retailers, the categories are merchandised or the product is merchandised by category. So you'll really want to bring a perspective on where your brand should live and think about where your brand should live on shelf. Often space is very literal by category. So if you have a facial skincare line, for example, in one of the brands that I loved working with, Undefined Beauty, has an amazing facial skincare line, and there's a sun serum, which is actually a hero item from that brand. But you'll want to bring that perspective of that sun serum needs to live in facial care, because if you're not clear with that or bringing that perspective, it might end up in sun care and it might have to sit by itself. So there are so many emerging brands that have a beautiful regimen in facial care, and then that might include a deodorant or a hair serum, but those are going to sit in different places. That's just how the store is laid out. And so you'll really want to think critically about your assortment to make sure that you'll have a strong brand presence in the category in which your products should live, which I always think of as 3 items is a good place to start.
That's really good. And I know as former merchants, we both know that the reason why we separate things out is because when the consumer or the guest comes into the store, they're thinking, I want to buy deodorant as an example, and they know deodorant is all going to be in this one section over here. So that's the reason why merchants might not advise keeping all of the things together, but separating it out by category, because it actually gives brands more visibility to the potential consumer. Because if they're looking for deodorant, they're more likely going to find it with the other deodorants, not over there in skincare, just because it happened to be a good branded story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about how the consumer shops with all of these decisions. Now, you can bring your brand together and tell that cross-category story on off-shelf space, like an end cap or a check lane. So it's important to understand those processes at each retailer too, so that you can budget for that. And if that's critical to your brand story, understand your plan to bring that together too in store.
I'd love to talk a little bit about Pacha now. You all have been at Whole Foods for a good while. And so I'd love to just hear any tips that you can share as a brand that's been at Whole Foods for a while, has had some success there. What are some things that you did as an emerging brand to be successful, to remain on shelf? I'd also like to understand from you how important innovation is. I know you said you're in product development. So how important is product development to your success and to your ability to thrive in naturals? I know in some retailers it matters more than others. So I would love to just get your perspective on that.
Absolutely. Pacha's success at Whole Foods Market, I think, is really because of Pacha's mission alignment with Whole Foods Market, and then also Pacha's ability to bring industry-leading innovation. So starting with mission alignment, it really helps to be mission aligned. Whole Foods Market's purpose is to nourish people and the planet. And so Pacha and Whole Foods Market are really aligned on that goal. So for example, Pacha and Whole Foods are aligned on the importance of regenerative agriculture. So therefore, the more work we can do together, then the more impact that we can have on the earth and its people. The more product we sell, the more good we can do, which supports both of our collective missions. So being mission aligned really helps set the stage that your goals are my goals. Let's figure out how to do this together so that we can deepen our impact on the world and its people. In terms of innovation, the natural consumer is very engaged with their products so that they tend to be early adopters. So as a result of that, Whole Foods is very interested in innovation. It's important to bring really meaningful innovation to your assortment and then have a plan for future development. So Pacha has really grown based on innovation and collaboration with Whole Foods to bring meaningful innovation to the customer, and launch then in a meaningful way to reach that customer and share why that product is exciting. At any retailer, I think it's really important to also be able to drive brand awareness using outside channels. So I think one helpful way to think about this is to think about your paid media as a way to support your retail sales. So the retailer will get you on the shelf, but they won't market a brand for you. So you really need to be able to drive awareness with their customers. A brand that has done this really well in my experience is Coco Kind. So Coco Kind launched in the natural channel first. Whole Foods was one of their very first retailers, if not their first large retailer that they launched with. And since they've grown their distribution to be at Target and Ulta, and they do an amazing job and really have from the start using social media and marketing to speak directly to their customer, to educate their customer, and then use that digital education and that digital channel to drive demand in store. So I think that's also really critical to success at a natural retailer and any retailer. And lastly, like I've said before, it's just important to understand all of the costs associated with those initiatives and then come prepared to invest to win.
Wow, that's really, really good insight. And as you talked a little bit about education on the tail end of that, I know so many brands don't always realize the role that retailers play. And so there's a little bit of a understanding of, well, if my product is at the shelf, won't it automatically sell? But to your point, the role of the retailer is more so to provide an avenue for distribution. And it's up to the brand to drive some of that traffic to the store. The retailer plays a role also in driving some traffic, but really it's a partnership, I would say, but also on the brand to drive that education so that people are saying, this is where I'm going to go to buy this product, as opposed to thinking that that's a heavy lift for the retailer. It's like, wait, you don't market it yourself, it's like, no, that's on you guys.
And that perhaps has shifted over the last decade within retail a bit too. Consumers have so many messages coming at them. It used to be that you might go to the retailer to understand what's new, and that's absolutely still happening, but there's so many other ways that consumers are getting information about beauty, and so there's then therefore so many more opportunities to reach them. I think you can think of it as your biggest sale is not to get into the retailer, or after you make that biggest sale of your brand, for example, the next biggest sale is ahead, and that's selling the product off the retailer's shelves.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And social media likely has a lot to do with that because it's at our fingertips via our phones or our computers, whatever device we're on. And that's just such an easy, accessible way for us to talk to brands and communicate and learn more about them.
Yeah, there's a lot more options. There's a lot more ways to reach the consumer, but that means that they're getting a lot more information through all of those channels too. So it's harder to break through.
I'm also curious a little bit, since you also come from a buying background, just how that background has helped you as you think about product innovation and bringing newness forward to the brand. Are there any things that you can share that might give some of the other product developers that are listening just some ideas or ways to think about things differently that have helped you at Pacha?
So when I was a buyer, I sat on the other side of the table from my brands, and I always wondered, is that fun? Because it looks really fun. So I'm happy to report that it is. I love being on the product development side and on the brand side of the business, but I definitely leverage my retail experience to determine what we should do as a brand or what new products we should develop to reach our consumers. So as a buyer, I really analyzed the customer, the market, the data for my category, and I was really looking for white space and how to win. And that is actually the exact same methodology that I apply to product development. I can quickly evaluate new ideas and then kind of run the numbers in my head and understand the sales potential. So that is definitely a benefit coming from a retailer, is making the same data-driven decisions that I did before. I've also learned a lot. So not only am I thinking about how something is going to sell and running those numbers in my head, but I'm now layering in new things that I've learned being on the brand side, profitability, internal operations. So now I'm thinking not only just what should we make, but how do we make it? One of the most fun projects I got to lead so far in my time at Pacha was our entrance into the home fragrance category. So we launched candles last year. And so this was an example where I was able to lead my team to understand an entirely new category, in a way, a new consumer and a new methodology to product design to meet the unique needs of that category.
That's so much fun. And it is so true, Amy, when you are on that product development side, it's really cool to think about the consumer and find the white space within your specific brand to say, how can we bring that to life? Are there any specific things that you consider to say, how can we stay ahead of what the retailer wants? Are there questions that you ask your buying teams or articles that you might read, books you might read or reference to try to stay ahead of what the retailer is looking for? Because I find white space is something that can be, I'm going to say, somewhat subjective, you know what I mean? Somewhat like, oh, it's more of an art to it than a science. So how do you stay ahead of what the retailer wants so that when you're developing product, you're developing things that, you know, you're feeling the retailer will likely bring in?
Yes. So if you get information from the retailer through a meeting or a strategy share out, absolutely take note of every possible thing you can. Listen. When they speak, listen, write it down, and incorporate that into your strategy and bring that back to them. I heard you say this, so here's how I incorporated that into our product design or our marketing strategy. But you don't always get to hear directly from the buyer. They are very, very busy. And one of the most fun things about being at a brand is that you can really become an expert. So in contrast, being a buyer, you manage a huge number of brands, multiple categories. These guys have a lot on their plate. And similarly, you have a lot on your plate as a brand, but it's different. You get to be more focused on perhaps a singular category or a market or a customer, and you can really dig in to be an expert. So this is a benefit to retailers too, because you have that capability to really go deep on who your consumer is and your own product category, and you can bring that knowledge back to them. So what I like to do is shop my category at other retailers, trend shop, get inspired, get new ideas, visit new markets. I love shopping in New York. Dallas is another favorite, going to industry shows, and then reading trend and industry reports, thinking about how do I deeply understand that consumer, and then how do I use that understanding to predict the future and decide what is that next new product that I want to create for that consumer, that unmet need, or what's the new way that consumers are going to be listening to brands, so I need to shift my communication strategy. Gather that expertise and then bring that to the retailer. That is extremely valuable to them. You understanding their customer helps them better understand their customer too.
That's really, really good. Oh, I love that so much. And I never thought of, retailers and brand owners as being kind of like these tellers of the future, but we very much are with the trends and trying to understand what might you need. And so let me go ahead and develop this product. But I really like that. Look, I love all of the information that you shared, especially learning more about the naturals market in particular. I think it's one of those areas that isn't talked about a whole lot, but still gives some emerging brands a great foot in the door in retail to test and learn, to partner with retailers, and to ultimately grow and scale their brand. And so as the conversation comes to a close, I'd love for you to just share any advice that you would give to early stage beauty brands that are looking to break into retail.
So my advice would be to understand the value that you can bring to the retailer, understand how you're going to drive demand to that retailer, and then also understand the cost structure and how you're going to support those initiatives. So first, understand the value that you can bring to the retailer. What is it that you can bring them that they don't have? Maybe it's a clean formulation that works better than anything on the market, or an innovative way to tell your environmental or social impact story. Maybe you can bring them a new customer that they aren't effectively reaching today. Or one of your greatest strengths, maybe you haven't launched at any retailer yet, and you can offer them the opportunity to be your exclusive launch partner or first to launch. So you hold a lot of things that they need. You need to capture what is it that they need most, and how can I tell that story? Then you have to tell the customer about it. So you need to be able to drive demand to retail somehow. So this will be a mix of your own marketing and social channels, and then opportunities at a retailer, like promotions, for example. If you get on the shelf, you have to have a plan for how you're going to tell people about it and then capture their purchase at that retailer. Lastly, retail in general is costly. So you will have limited success trying to change these costs, but your best tool is to fully understand them, secure the right amount of funding, and then bring that plan to launch.
That last part was really good, because retail is really costly and you likely won't have a lot of success in reducing those costs. That could be, repeated many times. And it's costly for everyone, all the brands that are in, including the emerging brands. I know it's that much more of a challenge for emerging brands because they're still building. But I think all the other tips that you shared, in addition to going into it, hopefully eyes wide open, will help these emerging brands so that they can really invest and try to get as much funding as they can to support them as they're getting ready to find those retail partners and grow and scale. So, yeah. Well, look, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today. This was such a good conversation. I learned a lot, and I always love having former merchants on, because there's just a lens that you have when you are or have been a merchant that I think is so helpful on the brand side. I feel like more and more merchants, could come over like what you did at Pacha and go to emerging brands and help them. And I think it's super helpful. So thank you so much.
I'm so happy to share. It's fun over here. So it's been my pleasure. Early in my career, I recognized that I love working with emerging brands, with founder-led brands, and that's why I stay in it, because this is fun, and that's why I'm on the brand side now too. It is as fun as it looks, like I said.
Thank you again to Amy for joining me on the episode today. It's so interesting to hear about how there are nuances between the different types of retailers out there. One of the points that was really interesting were the costs that Amy talked about, and specifically how the natural channel works with distributors like UNFI or KeHE, if you haven't heard of them. I think that's one of those things that founders don't always realize when they're going to market and establishing those retail partners. So thank you, Amy, for sharing that intel with us, and I hope this episode was helpful. As always, share this with a colleague or friend, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify Podcasts, because it helps to spread the word so that more founders can get access to this kind of information. As always, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.